Hi, I'm the son my father told to disappear. Not because I hurt anyone, not because I failed, but because I didn't look like the life he was trying to impress. On the night he was celebrating his perfect new family, I got a message. Don't come. Don't ruin everything. He said I was too embarrassing. Too embarrassing to be seen. But then someone at that party saw a photo and said my name out loud in front of everyone. And that changed everything. But you know what hurt the most? It wasn't being cut out. It was realizing they never planned to let me back in. I drove to my father's house expecting nothing more than a conversation I'd had 100 times before. The kind that started with coffee on the counter, polite questions about work, and a careful avoidance of anything real. Early December light sat low over the neighborhood, turning the windows of identical houses into dull mirrors. Everything looked calm. That should have warned me. Inside, the house smelled faintly of furniture polish and something sweet I didn't recognize. New candles, maybe. A sign of change. My father was sitting in his usual chair, posture straight, hands folded like he was waiting for a meeting to start. My brother leaned against the kitchen counter, phone in hand. My sister sat at the table, legs crossed, eyes already distant. No one asked how my drive was. The silence wasn't loud. It was deliberate. Conversation stopped when I walked in, then restarted a second too late, as if they'd all rehearsed where to pause. My father cleared his throat, the way he did when he wanted to sound reasonable. "This won't take long," he said. That was the first signal. When someone says that, it usually means the decision is already locked in. He talked about the New Year's party like it was a business event, not a family celebration. The guest list, the venue, the people who would be there. He used words like presentation and impression, the same tone he used when he used to talk about clients back when he still worked. My brother nodded along, adding little comments about how important this was for Dad. My sister chimed in about how people in that world noticed everything. What you wore, how you spoke, who you associated with. They all kept using the same words. Image, optics, expectations. No one said my name. At first, I thought maybe they were circling around something, easing into it. I waited for a question, an opening. Instead, my father looked straight at me, his face calm in a way that felt colder than anger. "We've decided it's better if you don't come," he said. The sentence landed quietly, like a door closing in another room. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because part of me still expected a follow-up. A condition, a compromise, something that implied I had a choice. My brother spoke next, voice soft but firm. "It's just one night. You know how this crowd is. It's not personal." My sister added, "They're particular. Dad's finally in a position where everything has to go smoothly." Finally. I asked the only question that mattered. "What, exactly, is the problem?" My father didn't hesitate. "This isn't about problems. It's about protection. About not creating unnecessary tension." He paused, then said it. Calmly. Almost kindly. "Don't come. Don't ruin everything." No raised voice, no anger. Just a conclusion. Something in my chest tightened. Not sharply, but steadily. Like a slow press. I realized in that moment that they weren't worried about what I might do. They were worried about what I represented. A version of the family that didn't fit the future he was building. I looked around the room, searching for something to hold on to. That's when I noticed the photo. A framed picture sat on the sideboard near the hallway. A family portrait, updated recently. New frame, thicker glass. My father and his fiancée stood at the center, smiling. My brother and sister were close beside him. I was there too, technically, at the edge, half a step back, cropped just enough that you had to look for me. I hadn't moved. The frame had. No one followed my gaze. No one needed to. The message was already clear. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something important. This wasn't a discussion. This was a removal. I stood, thanked them for telling me directly, and picked up my jacket. My father nodded, relieved. My brother avoided my eyes. My sister looked at her phone. As I walked toward the door, I realized the most painful part wasn't being excluded. It was how easily they'd aligned, how quickly my absence became a solution. He said it like the decision had nothing to do with me and everything to do with who they wanted to become. I didn't drive straight home after leaving my father's house. I parked a few blocks away from my apartment and just sat there. Streetlights buzzed above me, casting yellow rings on the windshield. My hands stayed on the steering wheel long after the engine stopped. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't. His voice echoed in my head, still calm, still rehearsed. Don't come. Don't ruin everything. That line had no weight behind it when he said it. No hesitation. Like he'd been waiting for the chance to cut the cord and finally be rid of the part of his life that didn't fit the picture. That's the part that stuck with me. I eventually got out of the car and walked up the steps to my apartment. The place was dark, but not cold. Still, I didn't turn on the lights. I set my keys down on the counter, took off my shoes, and lowered myself into the couch like my body didn't quite belong to me. Everything felt quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that wraps around your ribs and squeezes. I stared at the ceiling, then the wall, then the little crack near the baseboard that I always meant to fix, but never did. And somewhere in the middle of that, I started replaying things I hadn't thought about in years. When I was 9, my father told me I was the flexible one. My brother had a temper. My sister had needs. But me, I could adapt. That was supposed to be a compliment. He used to say it when I gave up the last piece of pie without complaining, or when I switched rooms so my brother could have the one with the bigger closet. That's what makes you strong, he'd say. You don't need things to go your way. At the time, I believed him. There was a Christmas where my gift got misplaced. It showed up in February. No one said sorry. My father just patted my shoulder and said, "You didn't make a fuss. That's real maturity." I carried that like a badge of honor for years. That's how it always was. My brother would shout, my sister would sulk, and I would adjust. They called it being easygoing. I didn't realize until much later it really meant I was easy to ignore. Back in the present, I made myself a cup of tea without really wanting one, just to hold something warm. I sat at the kitchen table and let the steam rise while the memories kept circling. There were so many little moments that didn't mean much at the time, but now clicked into place. At family dinners, I was always seated at the end. If there wasn't room in the car, I was the one who stayed behind. When someone needed to absorb tension, translate what one side meant to the other, or smooth over an argument, I was drafted without being asked. They didn't do it maliciously. That's what made it harder to name. They just expected me to understand. My brother always stood in the center of attention. Football trophies, scholarship headlines, and every new girlfriend paraded like a campaign poster. My father beamed at him. He called him legacy. My sister wasn't loud, but she knew how to align herself. She adopted their fiancé's mannerisms before the engagement was even official. She always knew the right thing to wear, the polite laugh at the right volume. And me? I was the buffer, the soft landing, the space filler, the one who made excuses for everyone else's behavior so the family wouldn't fracture, the one who swallowed disappointment because bringing it up would just cause more trouble. And the hardest part, I agreed to that role. For decades, I thought it was noble. I thought I was choosing peace. But looking back now, sitting alone in my own apartment at nearly midnight with no invitation to the party, where my family would celebrate a future that no longer included me, I saw it for what it was. They hadn't just gotten used to my silence. They'd taken it as permission. I looked around the room, the framed photo of us on my bookshelf, the last time we'd all stood together. I hadn't noticed before, but I wasn't in the middle there either. I was off to the side, always off to the side. I let the tea go cold. It hit me that silence had once made me feel in control, like I was the one choosing restraint, like I was stronger for not needing validation. But now, it just felt like I'd been slowly erased. And the thing that gnawed at me wasn't that they pushed me out. It was how easy I made it for them. I had thought I was protecting peace, but all I really did was disappear. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I got up and walked to the window. The street was empty. Everyone else was asleep or inside, living lives that probably weren't perfect, but at least had a place for them. I stood there a long time, leaning against the glass, asking myself a question I didn't want to answer. If I just faded out completely, would any of them even notice? I didn't say it out loud, but it echoed anyway. I spent the next morning doing something I hadn't planned on doing. I worked, not to distract myself, not to stay busy. I worked because it was the one place where things still made sense, where effort led to outcomes and decisions had weight. After the night I'd had, I needed something solid. I woke before sunrise, showered, and brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the whole building. The apartment felt different in the daylight, cleaner, more honest. I carried my mug into the small room I'd turned into an office years ago and closed the door behind me. The desk was exactly how I'd left it. Laptop centered, legal pad to the right. A neat stack of folders waiting to be reviewed. No family dynamics. No unspoken rules. Just work. That's when it hit me. This room had never asked me to be smaller. I opened my email and started where I always did. Messages from clients. Follow-ups from partners. Notes marked urgent, not because of ego or status, but because decisions depended on them. Numbers, deadlines, consequences. In this space, clarity mattered more than appearances. A call came in mid-morning, then another. I paced slowly as I spoke, explaining risks, outlining options, confirming projections. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften my words to keep anyone comfortable. I told the truth because that was the job. "Let's proceed," someone said on the other end of the line. "We trust your read on this." Trust. The word landed differently than it had the night before. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand. It occurred to me that no one on those calls knew my family. They didn't know who stood at the center of my father's life or who sat at the edges. They knew me only by the results I delivered. And they listened. I'd been doing this kind of work for years, quietly, discreetly. The kind of involvement that doesn't come with headlines or public credit, structural decisions, behind-the-scenes problem-solving, the kind that keeps things from collapsing when pressure builds. I never talked about it at family dinners. There was never room. Someone was always telling a louder story. By late afternoon, my calendar filled up faster than I'd expected. End-of-year decisions had a way of surfacing all at once. Budgets closing, contracts tightening, people needing answers before the holidays froze everything in place. As I reviewed a set of documents, a name caught my eye. Then another. Familiar. Not personal, but adjacent. Organizations that hosted events. Boards that overlapped. Donors whose names carried weight in certain circles. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the list more carefully. The upcoming New Year's event my father had been so focused on wasn't just a party. It was a convergence point. Business, influence, reputation. The kind of room where relationships quietly shaped outcomes for the year ahead. And I realized something else. I already worked with some of the people who would be there. Not directly, not socially, professionally, under agreements that valued discretion over visibility. They knew my voice, my judgment, the way I handled pressure, when stakes were high. They didn't know my family story, and they didn't need to. The thought unsettled me. Not because it felt like leverage, but because it exposed a gap my family hadn't bothered to look at. They were busy managing appearances while assuming I existed somewhere outside that world entirely. For the first time, I saw the outline of a collision forming. Not dramatic, not explosive, just inevitable. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister as evening settled in. A reminder about a dress code. A note about how important it was that everything feels right. I stared at the message longer than necessary. For a moment, I considered replying, explaining, correcting the assumptions, letting them know that the world they were so carefully preparing for wasn't as distant from me as they thought. Then I set the phone face down. Not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. There was a difference I hadn't understood before. All those years, my silence came from conditioning, from wanting to keep peace, from believing restraint was the same as wisdom. This time, it was a choice. I finished my work, shut down the laptop, and stepped back into the living room. Outside, the sky darkened and lights flickered on in neighboring windows. People settling into their evenings, lives continuing. I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not anger, not hope, awareness. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be included. I was paying attention. And what I didn't know yet was how soon all those separate worlds were about to collide. So when the email showed up, I wasn't surprised, but I still paused. It was a forward, not even sent directly to me. My sister had forwarded a message from a third-party event planner. No personal note, no hope you can make it, just the bare logistics, time, location, dress code. The subject line read, "Updated timeline, gala evening." That was the first signal. I clicked into the attachment. The PDF was glossy and over-designed like all these events are. Black tie, cocktail hour, sit-down dinner, a brief speech by family patriarch, which I assumed was my father, and then the names, dozens of them, friends, donors, acquaintances, their plus ones. My name wasn't there. I scrolled through the guest list again. Maybe I'd been added under a different category, support, extended family, overflow. No, nothing. It wasn't an invitation. It was a notification, a reminder that the machine was moving, with or without me. The next morning, another message came, this one in our family group chat. My brother chimed in casually, "Just confirming, we're doing photos with Dad before the event. 4:45 sharp. Stick to the color palette. Media might be floating around." No, "Hey, can you make it?" No inclusion. Just assumption. that I'd know my place. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the calendar invite that came attached to that same forwarded email. I clicked maybe. Then I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it out without hitting save. Maybe. That word did more damage than most people think. It's not uncertain. It's polite avoidance, a placeholder where a real answer should go. Later that afternoon, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was breezy, rehearsed. "Hey, just wanted to make sure you got the info about the event. Everything's a little nuts with the seating, so we've streamlined things. You know how it is. Hope you understand. No pressure. No pressure." There it was, wrapped in sugar, laced with acid. She didn't say, "Don't come." She didn't have to. The room had already been arranged without me in it. I sat back in my chair and let the silence fill the space. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be. It wasn't a sharp edge anymore. It was quieter now, slower, like a slow boil under a sealed lid. I opened the digital seating chart again, which I wasn't supposed to have access to. Old shared folders they'd forgotten I was still linked to. Table 1, Dad, his wife, my brother, his wife, my sister, her husband. Table 2, extended family, out-of-town guests, a few big-name donors, still no sign of me. But what stood out more was what wasn't said. My role, my seat, my part. There wasn't even a blank space where I might have been. Just absence, the kind that comes from planning, not oversight. I closed the file, opened a new document, and without really knowing why, I started typing out the timeline of the event, not for revenge, not even to keep track. Just to see clearly. Time, place, who was involved, what their public connections were, where paths might intersect. I wasn't planning anything. Not yet. But I was watching. I had spent years being told, "You understand." And I had too well. You've always been flexible. It's just easier this way. You're not like the others. All that translated to one truth. I was easier to erase, and they'd finally done it. But they misunderstood something. I wasn't folding anymore. I wasn't retreating. I was documenting. I answered no texts that week, no calls. Let their silence do the talking. I got daily emails with subject lines like rehearsal schedule and volunteer parking. Still no direct contact, still no acknowledgement. It was almost elegant, the way they moved around me. Like I'd already been dealt with. But what they didn't see, what they never really saw, was that quiet isn't absence, and silence in the right hands can be strategy. The night before the event, I walked past my suit hanging in the closet. I didn't reach for it. I wasn't going for them. I was waiting for the moment they thought they'd avoided. They thought keeping me out would keep things clean, without realizing what was already set in motion. It was New Year's Eve, just after 7, and my house was too quiet for a night the world had decided should be loud. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses came filtered through my phone, the kind people share without thinking. Group stories, boomerangs of champagne flutes, blurry videos of crowded rooms lit by golden lights and overpriced decor. My brother's voice popped up in a short clip someone had posted. "We're just getting started." Then the camera tilted, catching my father mid-toast, his arm raised, that performative grin he always pulled out when people were watching. I turned the phone face down. In the stillness, I could hear the hum of my fridge, the occasional crack of baseboard heating expanding and settling. The street outside was nearly empty, neighbors either away or gathered in someone else's living room. The kind of night made for noise, but my house held none. The dog I used to have, Max, would have curled up at my feet on a night like this. He'd hated fireworks, but loved being near me. Funny how animals never needed a reason to stay. Just presence. Just quiet. I leaned back on the couch, wrapped in the same sweater I'd had on since morning, and stared at the ceiling like it might tell me something I hadn't already learned. They were together. And I was. Here. Again. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out, but this time, it wasn't passive. It was structured, scheduled, confirmed by a mission and sealed by silence. Part of me, an old part, wanted to power down everything. Turn off the phone, unplug the router, let the world go on without me. No emails, no messages, no reminders, just blank space, just out. Not out of spite, not even sadness, really. Just tired. Tired of reading between the lines. Tired of pretending that maybe next time they'd notice. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge without looking, then shut it again. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't anything. At 8:12, I opened the group chat again, just to see. The photo had come through seconds earlier. The 6 of them, my father in the middle, brother on one side, sister on the other, their spouses flanking them, framed like a campaign ad. Family first, it might as well have said. There wasn't a square inch of that image that hadn't been planned. They looked happy, comfortable, complete. I clicked the photo once, zoomed in, studied their faces. My brother's wife wore a necklace I'd once helped him pick out, years ago when he still asked my advice. My sister's husband had on a watch I'd gifted Dad, one Christmas long before her wedding, back when I thought those things meant something. They had all inherited pieces of me, and now pretended I didn't exist. I dropped the phone on the table and walked to the front window. Across the street, a neighbor's TV flashed blue and red light across their living room. Someone inside laughed loudly. Then music swelled. I couldn't place the song. Didn't care to. For a long time, I stood there, not thinking much. Just not moving. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe this was when people disappeared. Not in some dramatic exit. Just quietly. They stop answering. Stop engaging, stop hoping, and the world adjusts. Nobody panics. Nobody notices. Things go on. I went back to the couch, sat down, and let my head fall into my hands. Not crying. Just folded. Trying to breathe through whatever this weight was pressing down. I thought about the idea of peace. What it would feel like to stop wanting a seat at their table. To stop looking for signs of care in people who only see your usefulness. It sounded easy, simple, false, because peace, if it meant becoming invisible, wasn't peace at all. It was disappearance. And that word, disappear, sat with me like a stone in the gut. Heavy, final. Maybe I had taught them this. Maybe my silence hadn't been noble. Maybe it just made things easier. Maybe they'd mistaken my restraint for agreement, my patience for permission. I let them believe I was fine because I didn't want to look weak, because I thought keeping the peace was strength. But strength doesn't mean swallowing yourself to make room for others. Strength, I was starting to learn, is the choice to stay. When leaving would feel easier. I sat in that thought for what felt like hours, though only minutes passed. Then it came back, quietly, almost like a whisper. That question I'd asked myself before. If I disappear quietly, will anyone notice? And for the first time, the answer didn't come in words. It came as a feeling. A low, slow current inside me that said, "You're still here. So, there's still something left to do." I was ready to disappear until something small reminded me why I never could. I didn't move at first. I just sat there, legs stretched out in front of me, phone dimmed beside me, the weight of the quiet settling again. But it was different now, not as thick. Something had shifted, like a knot that had finally loosened, even if just a little. I was still staring out the window when the chime sounded, 3 sharp dings from my laptop across the room. At first, I ignored it. I assumed it was another holiday promotion or one of those automated Happy New Year emails from companies I hadn't bought from in years. But then it came again. Not an email this time, but a secure message ping from my professional portal, the kind I only used with high-level clients. Rarely on holidays, almost never this late. I stood slowly, crossed the room, and tapped the touchpad to wake the screen. There it was. Subject: immediate clarification. Requested sender. Initials only. Someone high enough up that the name didn't need explaining. The type of person who doesn't ask twice. The message was brief. Terse, even. Confirm your availability for review of the presentation materials shared with the Frostridge Foundation earlier this quarter. There are references made tonight that suggest overlap with your proprietary frameworks. Need confirmation before internal discussion resumes. Your discretion is assumed. CM. I blinked at it, not because of the content, but because of the timing. Frostridge Foundation. That was the same name tied to the event my family was attending tonight. My brother had mentioned them once, in passing, months ago, about how the new partnership would open doors, how it was one of Dad's best political plays. He didn't know, none of them knew, that I'd been quietly consulting for them under NDA for the better part of a year. I reread the message. References made tonight. They were using it. My work. My structure. The strategy I'd built in silence. Not because they believed in me, not because they respected me, but because they thought I was invisible enough to never get credit, and quiet enough not to demand it. The moment hit with a strange kind of calm, like all the confusion, all the self-doubt, drained out through a pinhole, leaving only clarity behind. I opened the folder on my desktop, found the documentation, the emails, the drafts, the deliverables, and attached them to a reply. No emotion, just dates, headers, outlines, factual, undeniable. Then I paused before hitting send. This wasn't about making a scene. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen on my own terms. I wasn't stepping into their spotlight. I was pulling the curtain back from mine. I clicked send. The timestamp read 10:14 p.m. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the bare walls of my living room. Another chime hit my laptop, not a reply, but a calendar ping. My personal calendar had synced to the event reminder my brother's assistant had sent out weeks ago, probably by accident. I'd left it on, out of habit. New Year's celebration begins 7:30 p.m. Keynote remarks scheduled 10:45 p.m. 10:30. They were minutes away from standing on that stage, likely reading lines I'd unknowingly fed them. Rehearsed sincerity built on the skeleton of my thinking. I could have stayed angry. I could have turned it into a reason to crash the event, to expose them. But I didn't want theatrics. I wanted truth. And truth, once anchored, doesn't need applause to exist. I pulled up the secure folder one more time, double-checked that every document was watermarked and traceable. Then I encrypted the archive and submitted it to the oversight review system, the one used by all Frostridge partners for transparency, not for retaliation, just for record. Let the paper trail speak. Let the facts find the light in their own time. At 10:41, I shut the laptop. The air in the room had changed, like something that had been stuck finally moved forward. I leaned back in the chair, let my fingers rest loosely on my lap. My heart wasn't racing. There was no adrenaline, just a steady, growing awareness. This wasn't about being invited anymore. This was about owning what was already mine. I didn't need them to say my name tonight. I needed to stop hiding from it myself. For the first time, I wasn't deciding whether to be included. I was deciding how visible I was willing to be. I zipped up my jacket slowly. It wasn't for warmth. I wouldn't be outside long. The lobby of the resort was barely 5 minutes away by car, and the air had gone crisp, but not brutal. I checked my phone once more. No new messages. Not that I expected any. The streets were quiet, not dead, just settled. The kind of calm that settles before fireworks, both literal and otherwise. I didn't park in the valet lane. I pulled into the guest lot, tucked between two luxury SUVs. I stepped out and paused for a moment, staring up at the amber glow of the grand ballroom windows. Through the frosted glass, I could hear muffled laughter, the buzz of music, clinking glasses. It was late, close to midnight now. I walked toward the entrance without checking my reflection. I already knew how I looked, presentable, composed, exactly what no one had planned for. The woman at the check-in table glanced up and I gave her my full name. Her brows lifted slightly, then she tapped quickly at her tablet. "Oh, you're already cleared," she said, sliding a small lapel card into my hand. "Mr. M sent your credential earlier this evening." I gave her a polite nod. I didn't ask who Mr. M was. I knew. The hallway opened up to the ballroom like a stage. There were no trumpets, no dramatic pause, just a simple step forward, and I was in. No one noticed me at first. People were too engaged, too deep in surface-level conversations and practiced charm. My eyes scanned for the familiar, and there they were, my father, stiff in his tux, holding a glass of something amber. My brother 2 steps behind him, laughing a little too loud. And my sister, off to the right, speaking to a donor's wife with that perfect social smile she wore like perfume. I didn't walk to them. I moved toward the center, near one of the large floral displays flanking the stage. I stood just out of the main circle, hands folded lightly in front of me. And then, his voice, clear, measured, coming from the small cluster of elite hosts near the microphone. "I believe the framework we're applying tonight, particularly the layered engagement strategy, was structured by Mr. Carson Rell. He's here this evening." There was no flourish, no spotlight, just my full name spoken aloud in a room that wasn't supposed to contain me. Conversations didn't stop. They stalled. Eyes shifted, not dramatically, but enough. People began to scan the room. My father turned slowly, eyes searching. He froze when he saw me. Then something stranger happened. A pause in the background presentation, just a slide transition, landed on a large framed photo. It hadn't been visible from the entrance. I walked slowly toward it. It was a moment from the early days of the partnership, taken at a closed-door strategy session. A candid photo I'd never even seen. I was in the center, not blurred in the back. My name etched underneath, alongside 2 others, marked as architects of alignment. Not consultant, not anonymous contributor, architect. It sat there quietly, projected 10 feet tall on the screen. No one announced it. No one tried to explain. That silence said more than a speech ever could. I turned slightly and caught the look on my father's face. He knew. He knew the room had just shifted. He didn't move toward me. Neither did my brother or sister. They stood frozen, as if waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. How to spin this. But there was no spinning it. For years, they'd counted on my silence being compliance. Tonight, my silence wasn't permission, it was presence. A slow ripple of conversation picked up again, but it carried a different texture now. Thinner, uneasy. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't need to. As I stepped back slightly toward the edge of the room, someone brushed past me and offered a quiet nod. Another followed with a brief, "Well done." No fanfare, just acknowledgement. That was enough. I looked across the room and saw the moment it truly landed on my father. Not just the exposure, but what it meant. His mouth tightened, his jaw set, not in shock, but in calculation. And that's when I knew. I could see it in my father's face. This wasn't over yet. I didn't move when I saw him coming. I took a slow breath and stayed exactly where I was, just inside the edge of the ballroom near the lounge entrance. People were still murmuring, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. That confusion created a fragile pause, and my father stepped into it like he'd been waiting for the opening. He didn't look angry. That was the first thing that struck me. He looked calm, purposeful, the way he always did when he believed he could still control the narrative. He approached one of the senior hosts first, placing a light hand on his arm, leaning in just enough to look collaborative rather than defensive. I was close enough to hear fragments. "I just want to clarify something before there's any misunderstanding," my father said, voice smooth. "Carson has done consulting work, yes, but the framing earlier may have overstated his role. These things can sound bigger than they are when taken out of context." Taken out of context. I felt the room tighten. The host's expression shifted. Not convinced, but cautious. And caution, in rooms like this, was dangerous. My father continued, carefully choosing his words like stepping stones. "He's always been independent. Sometimes that independence creates confusion about alignment, especially when people are eager to claim credit. Claim credit. That one landed harder. I felt the temperature in my chest spike, not anger exactly, but something sharper. This wasn't just about erasing me. This was about painting me as unstable, as opportunistic, as someone who had wandered into a room that wasn't really his. A few nearby guests exchanged glances. No one spoke, but the certainty I'd felt minutes ago thinned, not against me, just away from me. That was the danger. I realized something in that moment. If I spoke now, if I defended myself, it would look like a scramble, a son pleading his case at his father's engagement party. Nothing would undermine my credibility faster, but staying silent meant letting the doubt settle. It was a lose-lose corner, and my father knew it. He turned slightly, finally acknowledging me with a nod that looked almost paternal. "Carson," he said lightly, loud enough for others to hear, "I hope you understand. This isn't the time or place for personal claims. We're here to celebrate." Celebrate. The word felt hollow in my ears. I could feel my brother watching, calculating whether to step in. My sister stood frozen, lips pressed tight, already rehearsing how she would explain this later. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't need to be the one to give it. Instead, I shifted my weight and looked past my father toward the far side of the room, where the senior authority, the man who had authorized my credentials, stood quietly observing the exchange. He caught my eye. I didn't signal. I didn't nod. I simply waited. That wait stretched, just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then the man stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He didn't even look at my father at first. For clarity, he said evenly, addressing the group rather than any one person. The framework presented tonight was not consulting work. It was principal architecture. Mr. Rell's role is documented, contractual, and integral. The room went still. He turned then to my father. Any suggestion otherwise would be inaccurate. No judgment, no emotion, just fact. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. My father's face drained, not dramatically, but enough. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He had no counter left that wouldn't make things worse. Around us, the countdown clock on the wall flicked to the final minute. People shifted. Glasses were raised again, but the energy had changed. Not celebratory, resolved. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. As the numbers began to drop, I understood something with absolute clarity. The truth hadn't needed me to fight for it. It had only needed me to stop stepping aside. When the countdown began, the truth had already landed. When the countdown hit 0, there were cheers, hollow, delayed, uneven. Champagne glasses clinked out of habit, not celebration. Someone near the stage tried to get the crowd's attention back with a toast, but the momentum had passed. Midnight had arrived. But something else had landed first. I remained near the fringe of the ballroom, not hiding, just still. My body hadn't moved, but something internal had shifted. A release, not of tension exactly, but of obligation. I didn't need to make anyone believe anything anymore. The truth had done its job, quietly, completely. My father hadn't looked at me again. He stood off to the side with a small cluster of board members, speaking low. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't raging. Just recalibrating, like a man whose foundation had cracked beneath him, and he was already trying to pretend he'd meant to walk on gravel. That was his talent. Adjusting the narrative mid-sentence, mid-century, if needed. But tonight, it didn't land. Not even with his usual allies. There was no applause, no reinforcement, no redirect. Just quiet. I glanced across the room and saw my sister speaking to someone near the refreshments table, her voice low, her expression strained. My brother wasn't far, staring into his glass, jaw clenched. Neither of them approached me, and I didn't move toward them either. There was nothing left to explain. I stepped away from the crowd and toward the outer hallway, the music softening behind me. As I passed one of the side displays, my eyes caught the photo again. The same one from before, but this time it hadn't been cropped. My face was there, full frame, name spelled correctly beneath it, role accurately described. A year ago, they had edited me out, literally. Cropped the image, removed the tag, told the press I wasn't available for comment as if I hadn't been part of the planning from the start. But here it was now. Undeniable, unchallenged, not featured as a favor, just there. I didn't stop walking, didn't pause to take a final look. The photo wasn't for me anymore. It never had been. My identity had been trapped in their version of history for too long. And now that the door was open, I wasn't going to spend another minute trying to prove what had always been true. I stepped outside into the night air. It was cooler than I expected. The sky still flickered faintly with the last of the fireworks, and the echo of the countdown still lingered like smoke in the distance. But out here, on the other side of the double doors, it was peaceful. A valet offered to call a car. I shook my head and walked past, hands in my coat pockets, shoes crunching softly against the gravel drive. I didn't have a destination in mind, just movement. Forward. Uncomplicated. Behind me, the celebration would wrap up soon. People would leave with half-finished drinks and polite nods. Tomorrow, some would act like nothing had happened. Others would call it brave or awkward or overdue, but I wouldn't be there to hear any of it. That wasn't the point. The truth had been needed. Not to win something, but to stop bleeding for it. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That had surprised me. I had braced for bitterness, for the burning need to say something sharp or final. But what came instead was space. Not forgiveness, exactly. Just clarity. My father had lost something tonight, yes. But it wasn't because I exposed him. It was because he refused to adapt, to admit. The room didn't turn against him. They just stopped defending him. That's how silence works when it shifts sides. And my siblings, I didn't hate them. I understood now. They had played along because it was safer. And when people age into comfort, safety becomes the biggest currency. But I wasn't spending my next decade buying silence. I thought about family in that moment, not as a structure, but as a practice, a choice. And I realized I didn't need access to every room to know where I belonged. Family could exist in fragments, in people who remembered the real you without needing reminders, in voices that didn't tremble when they said your name in a room full of others. That was enough. I reached the edge of the property where the path bent toward the parking lot. No crowd, no spotlight. Just me, walking forward without chasing anyone. No announcements, no apologies. Just alignment. Somewhere in the distance, I heard faint music begin again. Someone inside trying to reboot the party. But out here, the only soundtrack was the soft wind and the steady rhythm of my own steps. There are moments when you stop asking to be seen and start choosing where you belong.